There's a strange kind of beauty hiding in the cracks of a woman's life. Not the beauty that smiles for the camera or checks every box, but the quiet, trembling kind. The beauty that shows up even when she doesn't feel like she deserves to. She's the woman who tried to do everything right, to be gentle and wise, patient and forgiving, composed and kind. And somewhere along the way, she forgot that perfection was never the goal. She thought peace would come once she got everything under control, when the house stayed clean, when the mirror stopped reflecting the tired eyes, when her prayers sounded less like confusion and more like poetry. But peace never showed up in her perfect plans. It came in whispers, in the soft surrender of not knowing what else to do, in the tear that fell mid-sentence, in the messy, unfinished prayer that God still heard. Because grace doesn't wait for you to have it all together. It meets you right where you fall apart. It wraps its arms around the version of you that no one claps for, and it whispers, "Even this is holy." Maybe you've felt that ache too. The pressure to be better, prettier, stronger, more faithful, and the quiet guilt that comes when you just can't keep up anymore. But what if the cracks aren't your shame? What if they're your story? Every mistake, every moment you thought you ruined everything, they were never detours. They were doorways. Doorways that opened not to your failure but to His mercy. And if you look closely, you might see it. How the light slips through every broken line, how it paints the very pieces you tried to hide. So maybe today, you stop running from your reflection. Maybe you stop apologizing for being human, because imperfection isn't proof of your weakness. It's proof that you were brave enough to live. To try. To care deeply and fall hard and still get back up. That's not failure. That's faith in motion. If you've been holding your breath, trying to be flawless, exhale. Grace isn't looking for a flawless woman. It's looking for an honest one. A woman who can say, "I don't have it all figured out, but I'm still here." That's where the real beauty begins, not in the symmetry, but in the sincerity. So stay a while. Let's walk together through this sacred mess, the heartbreak, the laughter, the in-between moments that never make it to the highlight reel. There's something waiting for you here, not another lesson in perfection, but the quiet discovery that you've been loved the entire time, even with trembling hands and unfinished prayers. And before we begin, take a deep breath. If your soul's been searching for something real, for a place where faith doesn't require pretending, then you're home. Subscribe, not for another voice telling you how to fix yourself, but for reminders of the one who already called you whole. She didn't notice when it happened, when doing her best quietly turned into never being enough. It began with something so small, a whisper in the back of her mind that said, "You could have done better." It wasn't cruel at first. It sounded responsible, mature, even holy, but it grew louder each time she missed a step, each time she showed a flaw, until it became the only voice she could hear. Soon, she was measuring her worth by what she could fix. Every mistake became a reason to withdraw a little deeper into herself. And what once was faith started feeling like fear. Fear of not living up to what she thought God expected from her. She dressed the fear in discipline, in humility, in silence. But deep down, she was starving for rest. She stopped celebrating small victories because they never felt like victories at all. If she accomplished something, her mind moved on to what was still wrong, what still needed work. If someone said she was kind, she remembered the moment she lost her temper. If they said she was strong, she remembered the night she cried until morning. And slowly, the joy of living turned into the performance of surviving. That's the cruel irony of perfection. It hides behind good intentions. It pretends to be devotion, when it's really desperation. It looks like strength, but it's fear wearing makeup. And maybe you've known that too. That feeling of trying to keep your faith spotless, when all you really wanted was to feel seen, to feel safe, to feel enough. She started mistaking exhaustion for holiness, as if the more she suffered, the closer she was to heaven. But heaven doesn't demand exhaustion, it offers rest. And grace doesn't sound like guilt, it sounds like quiet acceptance, like a voice saying, "You can stop trying so hard, I'm still here." The truth is, perfection became her way of hiding. It was safer to control the details than to admit she was afraid of being loved as she really was. But perfection is a lonely place. It doesn't leave room for laughter, for mistakes that turn into lessons, for love that forgives. It only leaves you with mirrors that never smile back, until one day something broke. Not loudly, not like glass shattering, but softly, like a sigh escaping after years of silence. She looked at her reflection and saw the woman behind the effort, the one who had been waiting for permission to stop performing. Her eyes were tired, but there was something beautiful in them now, something real, and as that old armor began to fall, she felt something sacred stir inside. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but surrender. It was the quiet, unexplainable moment when she realized she didn't need to be flawless to be faithful. She just needed to be honest. And for the first time in years, she whispered to herself, "I think that's enough." Falling was never part of her plan. She was raised to keep things steady, to stand tall, to stay composed, to never let anyone see her stumble. She learned early that strong women keep going, even when they're breaking inside. So when life began to unravel, she didn't slow down. She tightened her grip. She smiled wider, worked harder, prayed louder, and told herself that faith meant never falling apart. But grace has a strange way of finding the ones who fall. It doesn't wait for you to climb the mountain. It kneels in the dust beside you, wipes the dirt from your hands, and whispers, "You don't have to prove yourself to be loved." It doesn't call you higher. It meets you lower. It meets you exactly where you collapsed. She didn't believe that at first. Weakness made her uncomfortable. It felt like betrayal. To her faith, to her family, to the version of herself she thought she was supposed to be. She saw every tear as failure, every unanswered prayer as proof that heaven had gone quiet. But grace doesn't disappear when heaven feels silent. Sometimes it speaks through the quiet itself. One afternoon she couldn't carry it anymore. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no lightning. Just a tired woman on a kitchen floor, hands trembling over a sink half filled with water, heart aching under the weight of should have been better. She cried, not pretty tears, but the kind that take your breath away. And when she had nothing left, she finally stopped. And in that stillness she met something sacred. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was holy. It was the sound of surrender, the quiet space where exhaustion turns into prayer. She felt the warmth of sunlight touch her face through the curtain, and in that small, ordinary light, she heard it, the soft, steady voice that said, "You don't have to hold the world together." She sat there for a long while, not trying to understand, not trying to fix, just being. For the first time in years, she let herself exist without earning it, and that stillness, that fragile, trembling peace, became her first lesson in falling. She realized that maybe grace doesn't demand strength. Maybe it simply invites truth, raw, trembling, unpolished truth. Maybe the courage God asked of her wasn't to climb higher, but to fall softer, trusting that love would catch her before the ground did. The moment she stopped pretending, she began to heal. Her tears didn't wash away her faith, they watered it. Every drop became a prayer too honest to be rehearsed, too broken to be fake, and too beautiful to be ignored. And she saw it clearly now. The strength she'd been chasing all her life was never meant to be flawless. It was meant to be faithful. Her beauty didn't fade when she broke. It just changed shape, like stained glass, shattered yet radiant when the light shines through. Every crack became a window, a place where grace could enter, a place where love could breathe. She wasn't ashamed of her scars anymore. They were proof that she had lived, fallen, and been lifted again. And when she finally rose from that floor, the world hadn't changed, but she had. She looked at her reflection, and instead of guilt, she saw gratitude. The same eyes that once searched for perfection now carried peace. And softly, almost in disbelief, she whispered, "I fell, and I'm still here." And somewhere, in that quiet morning light, heaven smiled back. Healing didn't look the way she thought it would. It wasn't tidy or quick, and it didn't feel like a miracle at first. It was slower, quieter, like dawn finding its way through fog. She woke up some days with peace in her chest, and others with tears on her pillow, wondering if Grace had forgotten her again. But even in the inconsistency, something inside her was changing. She stopped asking God to make her perfect and started asking Him to make her present. To meet her in the middle of unfinished prayers, unmade beds, and emotions she still didn't know how to explain. And in that messy middle, she discovered something she'd never known before, that becoming isn't about arrival. It's about allowing yourself to be remade again and again. There was a time when she feared starting over, as if it meant she had failed. But now she saw that every again was an act of mercy. Each morning a small resurrection. Each setback another invitation to trust. She began to see her scars not as proof of damage, but as landmarks. Places she'd met God face to face and survived. The more she surrendered, the more she softened. She learned that strength wasn't hard edges and clenched fists. It was open hands and a quiet heart. She didn't need to have answers anymore. She just needed to show up. Tired, messy, real. Because grace doesn't work through perfection. It breathes through honesty. There were moments she still stumbled back into self-doubt, still looked at her reflection, and saw all the things she wasn't. But now, she didn't stay there. She'd learned to pause, to breathe, to remember that the same hands that shaped galaxies also shaped her heart. And He wasn't done yet. Her flaws weren't final. They were fingerprints of a story still unfolding. And in that truth, something inside her lifted. She started walking slower, noticing things she used to miss. The warmth of sunlight through a window, the rhythm of her own breathing, the quiet voice that said, "You're growing, even here." She realized that life wasn't about becoming flawless. It was about becoming faithful, to show up in the mess with grace and grit and call that enough. The beauty in becoming wasn't that she changed into someone new, but that she became more herself, the self that Grace always saw. And she finally understood. Healing isn't about erasing who you were. It's about remembering who you were always meant to be. The woman she's becoming isn't perfect, but she's whole, and that's even more sacred. It took her a long time to look in the mirror again, not just to glance, but to see. For years, that reflection had been a battlefield, a war between who she was, who she used to be, and who she thought she needed to become. But one morning the light was different. It wasn't harsh or demanding. It was gentle, almost kind. And for the first time, she didn't rush past the mirror. She paused. There she was. Not the version she tried to edit, not the woman she used to hide behind smiles and checklists, but the one Grace had been quietly shaping through every failure, every unanswered prayer, every quiet night she thought she was alone. Her eyes were softer now, not because the pain had vanished, but because she'd stopped fighting herself to be loved. She realized that the reflection looking back wasn't a stranger. It was a survivor. A woman who'd walked through her own undoing and found God in the ruins. The kind of woman who didn't glow because life was easy, but because she'd been broken open enough to let the light through. Every scar, every tremor, every tremble of uncertainty, all of it had become holy ground. She smiled, not to convince anyone, but because peace had become her second skin. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, steady, unshakable. She no longer prayed to be perfect. She prayed to be true. To live as someone who carries mercy in her voice and gentleness in her hands, even toward herself. The woman who once begged to be enough had stopped striving. Now she simply was. And in that simple being, in that calm, grounded acceptance, she saw it. The beauty that had always been there. Not the kind you find in flawless faces, but the kind that blooms in forgiven souls. She wasn't trying to become a new version of herself anymore. She was learning to live in the truth of the one she already was. Beloved, whole, seen. And maybe that's what grace really is. Not something that waits at the end of the road, but something that walks beside you, whispering, "Even this is sacred." The mirror didn't show her perfection. It showed her presence. A woman no longer performing, but existing, honestly, fully, beautifully. And as she turned from the mirror, she felt the warmth of sunlight spill across her face, and she smiled again. Not because she had to, but because she finally believed it. The grace she'd been chasing had been staring back the whole time. Maybe this was the lesson all along, that the goal was never to be perfect, but to be present, fully, honestly, beautifully present. To wake up each morning, not asking, "How do I fix myself today?" but whispering, "How do I meet grace right where I am?" She used to think holiness meant hiding the cracks, polishing the pain, and pretending it didn't hurt. But now she knows. Holiness isn't spotless. It's sacred dust held together by love. And that love doesn't leave when you fall apart. It lingers. It sits beside you, pours light into your shadows, and waits patiently until you remember who you are. She doesn't need to prove herself anymore. The woman she's becoming is not perfect, but she's real. And real is where God writes his favorite stories. In the chaos, in the laughter, in the silent prayers you think no one hears. He doesn't love a version of you that has it all figured out. He loves you. Right now. With the questions, the cracks, and the courage to keep showing up. So if you've been chasing a life that looks perfect, pause. Take a breath. You're already standing in the middle of something holy. Even you're waiting. You're wondering. You're wandering. They're not mistakes. They're the language of grace. Because the God who began something good in you hasn't changed his mind about finishing it. And maybe tonight, as you close your eyes, you'll feel it. That quiet assurance that you don't need to be more to be loved. The light that once terrified you now feels warm again. And you'll whisper what she did once. Not as a prayer for strength, but as a song of peace. I am not perfect, but I am loved. And if this message reached you tonight, if it reminded you that your cracks can still shine, then stay a little longer. This space, this channel, is for women like you, who are learning to see the beauty in becoming, and the grace that never leaves. So, subscribe, not to chase perfection, but to walk with us through it all. The silence, the softness, the sacred imperfection that makes us whole. Because somewhere within your story, grace is still whispering. You're already enough.